नमः सर्वेभ्यः। मम नाम दिनेशः। फ्रीमोंट संस्कृतकेन्द्रस्य कार्यकर्ता अस्मि। आदौ ध्येयमन्त्रः। पठामि संस्कृतं नित्यं, वदामि संस्कृतं सदा, ध्यायामि संस्कृतं सम्यक्, वन्दे संस्कृतमातरम्। संस्कृतस्य प्रसाराय नैजं सर्वं ददाम्यहम्। संस्कृतस्य सदा भक्तो वन्दे संस्कृतमातरम्। संस्कृतस्य कृते जीवन्, संस्कृतस्य कृते यजन्, आत्मानमाहुतं मन्ये वन्दे संस्कृतमातरम्। हिन्दुधर्मं समाजं च पवित्रां संस्कृतिं तथा संरक्ष्य ननु कुर्याम विश्वं शान्तिसमन्वितम्। अक्टोबर् मासः हिन्दू परंपरा मासः। तदंगत्वेन अक्टोबर् 2 दिनांकतः प्रतिदिनं हिन्दू परंपरा स्मरणं यूट्यूब माध्यमेन प्रवर्तमानम् अस्ति इति अत्यन्त हर्षास्पदः विषयः। अस्माकं एषा महती परंपरा अनादिकालात् स्थिरतया प्रवर्तमाना अस्ति। भगवतः कृपया भवतां प्रोत्साहेन च अनेक कार्यकर्तॄणाम् उद्यमेन च गतेभ्यः 14 दिनेभ्यः अयं कार्यक्रमः नैरन्तर्येण प्रदर्श्यते। अद्य भवति 15 निरूपणम्। विषयः अस्ति ज्ञानपरम्परा इति। वक्तुः परिचयं कारयितुम् इदानीं रमेशमहोदयम् आह्वयामि। रमेशमहोदय, प्लीज अनम्यूट योरसेल्फ।
धन्यवादः दिनेश महोदय। मम नाम रमेशः। सिन्सिनाटी संस्कृतकेन्द्रस्य कार्यकर्ता अस्मि। अस्माकं सौभाग्यं यत् श्रीमान् सुभाष काक् वर्यः अस्मिन् कार्यक्रमे वक्तुम् अङ्गीकृतवान् अस्ति। महोदयस्य परिचयं कारयितुम् इच्छामि। सुभाष काक् महोदयः मूलतः जम्मू कश्मीरतः IIT देहलीतः सङ्गणकशास्त्रे PhD पदवीं प्राप्य साम्प्रतम् ओक्लहोमा स्टेट् विश्वविद्यालये सङ्गणकशास्त्रविभागे रेजेंट्स् प्राचार्यः अस्ति। प्रोफेसर् सुभाष महोदयः भारतप्रधानमन्त्रिणः शास्त्र तन्त्रज्ञ नवप्रवर्तन समितेः सदस्यः, साइंस टेक्नोलॉजी इनोवेशन एडवाइजरी काउंसिल। महोदयस्य गणित विज्ञान खगोल तत्त्वज्ञान विषयेषु विशिष्टं योगदानम् अस्ति। तन्निमित्तं 1920 वर्षे सुभाष काक् वर्यः भारत सर्वकारेण पद्मश्रीः इत्येतेन प्रशस्त्या पुरस्कृतः। विज्ञान शास्त्रादि क्षेत्रेषु भारतीयानां योगदानम् इत्येतं विषयम् अधिकृत्य अस्मान् बोधयतु इति सुभाष काक् महोदयं प्रार्थये।
Dhanyavad, Ramesh Mahodaya. I shall speak for the next few minutes on some of the principal contributions in the Jnana Parampara or knowledge tradition that many of the listeners may not be familiar with, because there is a lot which is a part of what we read on in history books and elsewhere. But there is much more that's being revealed in the researches that have been carried out by historians all across the world in the last 3 or 4 decades. So I'll just focus on some of these things. First, I want to speak about physics itself, because in modern times, the idea is that all fields ultimately are based on physics, because from physics comes chemistry, from which comes biology, and from biology comes brain science, and then consciousness. This is the standard view. But as we all know, in Vedanta, or in generally in the Vedic tradition, the Chaitanyam or consciousness is given primacy, and Chaitanya and Bhautik are supposed to be like two sides of the same coin. Reality has two aspects: consciousness and physical reality. And this is something, this idea, when it came to the notice of Western scholars, was to transform physics completely. In fact, one of the two creators of quantum mechanics, Erwin Schrödinger, he was from Austria, who is also a Vedantin, writes in his autobiography that the central idea of quantum mechanics, which is the deepest scientific theory that exists, because without quantum mechanics, you cannot explain chemistry and biology and everything else. So he claims in his autobiography that the central idea of quantum mechanics came to him from the Upanishadic Mahavakya, I am Atma Brahma, that this Atman or this Pind is in some mysterious way equivalent to Brahmanda. And this gave him the idea of superposition, which is a central idea. There are two central ideas in quantum mechanics. One is that reality is a superposition of all possibilities. The second idea is also in Vedanta. In fact, in one of the Vedantic traditions called Drishti Srishti Marga, the idea is that the deity creates reality through drishti, through observation. So the second aspect of quantum mechanics is that out of the superposition, one of the possibilities gets actuated by the interaction of the observer with the experimental arrangement. So the foundation, you could then say, was taken by the creators of quantum mechanics from the insights of Vedanta. Now, of course, some people critique all this narrative by saying that, look, certainly the rishis were not aware of the general framework, and which is fair enough. But what we are talking about here is the absolutely extraordinary understanding, if you will, of consciousness. And we can't use the word understanding, because understanding normally connotes logical meaning or logical analysis, because what we are here talking about is this division of knowledge, as in the Mundaka Upanishad, into two categories, apara and para, where apara is the knowledge of outside things or knowledge related to conceptual schema, and para is consciousness. Para is the knowledge that the observer inheres. So this is one interesting thing, and you can sort of explore this further in Kanada's sutras, which are the beginning of Vaisheshik Darshan. And I translated the sutras 6 years ago in a book called Matter and Mind, which is readily available. And I was also astonished that not only did the sutras have a place for the manas, which is the conscious mind, but also Atman, and it also had two of the three Newton's laws of motion almost exactly in the same form as given by Newton. Don't take my word for it. You can check it for yourself by downloading this book, Matter and Mind, and checking out the sutras yourself, or obtaining the sutras from elsewhere. Now, the other big, if you have a stool, three-legged stool, tripadha, three-legged stool of modern knowledge, the second one is that of computer science. And computer science has two aspects to it. One is the concept of programming, of rules, and then rules about rules, both of which are already available about 500 BCE in Ashtadhyayi's grammar of Sanskrit, which has about 4,000 rules. And according to computer scientists, you can also look at Ashtadhyayi as a equivalent to a universal Turing machine. And I'm quoting here the famous Sanskritist who was a professor for a very, very long time at Berkeley and who passed away a few years ago, named Fritz Stahl, who was originally from Holland. And so this is one aspect, the conceptual idea of how computation should be done, as is also done, for example, in an algorithm. An algorithm, of course, as we know, was translation from the sutras that the Arabs, the word I'm talking of here, that the Arabs received from India in the work of Aryabhatta and Brahmagupta and others, when they translated these texts in Baghdad into Arabic. Now, the other aspect of this whole structure of computers, which is transforming the whole world as we know it, is mathematical logic. And mathematical logic and the idea of a computer machine is credited to three Englishmen around 1850s. One is Charles Babbage, Augustus de Morgan, and George Boole. And in 1898, George Boole's widow, because George Boole died maybe, I believe, in the 1860s, George Boole's widow, who was a well-known science writer of the 19th century, wrote a famous essay where she claimed that these three pioneers obtained the central ideas from George Everest, who was the Surveyor General of India, who had lived in India for many, many years and learned Navya Nyaya, which was created, as we know, about 1,000 years ago in Bihar and Bengal. And Navya Nyaya, according to modern linguists, is exactly equivalent to mathematical logic. And you can check it out again for yourself. There are lots of Sanskritists who have worked on Navya Nyaya and shown that it's equivalent to mathematical logic. Now, the third leg of this framework is cosmology. And as we know, the Puranas speak of cosmology, and even in the Rig Veda, you have the Nasadiya Suktam, for example, where the idea of what was there before Srishti occurred is provided. And as we know, the general conception in Vedanta is that everything emerges out of consciousness, from which emerge the various bhutas, starting with Akasha, and then Vayu, then Tejas, then Apaha, and then finally Prithvi. And then at Pralaya, an opposite sequence occurs. Prithvi gets absorbed in Apaha, Apaha gets absorbed in Tejas, Tejas into Vayu, and Vayu into Akasha. And then finally all into consciousness. So what's fascinating here is that, first of all, even at the superficial level, there is a parallel that modern astronomy gives us. And the parallel is that we know that stars, when they get depleted of their energy, become red giants. And the visualization is that when the solar system, when the sun runs out of its energy, sun will become bigger and bigger and bigger, many, many hundreds of times bigger than it. And finally, it will take in the various planets, and then everything, all of these will be gone. Very similar to the conception that we have in the Vedic schema. Now, there has been a wrinkle to all of this after 1990s. In 1990s, it was discovered that not only is the universe expanding, but the expansion rate is actually accelerating. And this has created a big crisis. In order to explain it, cosmologists and physicists have had to postulate 68% of the universe to consist of dark energy, for which there is not the slightest bit of evidence. And likewise, 27% of the universe is supposed to be dark matter to explain the anomalous motions of stars and galaxies, again, for which there is no evidence whatsoever. And these two taken together are about 95%. 4.5% is interstellar dust, so that makes it 99.5%. So modern physics and astronomy is able to explain only 0.5% of the physical universe. So there is a huge crisis in cosmology. Now, since I've been working on Indian sciences for many, many years and different aspects of Indian sciences, I was, I would imagine, maybe not consciously, unconsciously inspired by the idea, for example, in the Kannada's Vaisheshik Sutras, where Kannada says that the idea of Dik and Kal come later. See, what is fundamental, of course, are our indriyas, our senses, our sense organs. And from here, we create the ideas of directions and of time. And therefore, directions are not fundamental to reality. So this is what Kannada says. And this perhaps was inspirational to me a couple of years ago. And I'm trying to make it autobiographical so that you'll be more interested in this. So this is sort of inspirational. And I was able to prove a mathematical theorem that the optimal representation of information is not in three directions, in three values, integer 3, but rather in E. E is 2.718. And if you assume, if you accept it, if physical space is also not three-dimensional, but only E-dimensional, then you can show that gravitation itself is a consequence of this E-dimensionality. And not only can you show this, and as you know, those of you who do physics, gravitation is an outlier. The standard model that we have is able to unify electromagnetism, the weak and the strong forces, but not gravitation. But if gravitation is a consequence of the very nature of space, then that is an important advance. And I published a whole series of papers, and you can Google eight-dimensional universe, and these papers are in Nature Scientific Reports and many other journals. And if all of this is indeed right, and it solves the dark energy problem, and not only does it solve that problem, it also solves the current cold death outcome of the universe. If you accept modern cosmology, since the universe is expanding at an accelerating rate, therefore, ultimately, all the stars and the planets will keep away further and further from each other. And when the energy is all spent in the stars, then the universe will all be dead. It's called a cold death scenario. Now, if you accept that the E-dimensionality is what causes gravitation, then you can also explain why the universe is accelerating in this phase after it became about 10 billion years old. And after some more time, that acceleration will start to go slow, and then eventually it will reverse itself, and therefore the universe will not die a cold death. So at least, conceptually, that's a much more comforting thing than what was otherwise. So now I also want to address two other things. First of all, now this has implications also for health sciences. Right now, medicine is facing a crisis. America, which spends 20% of its GDP into healthcare, has had fatality rate associated with COVID, which is about 10 times India's. Now, of course, Americans say we don't accept India's statistics, they're not reliable, but it's 10 times the Japanese statistics, it's 10 times the Korean statistics, and even worse, compared to many other countries. So now people are saying that, is it possible that the very framework of allopathic medicine is limited because it's based on binary logic, and binary logic is not optimal? If you are looking at integer values, although the most optimum value is E, which is 2.718, but if you're looking at integer values, then 3 is way superior because 3 is quite close to 2.718 than binary. Now we know that Ayurveda is based on ternary logic. And this could be one reason. Ayurveda is also a kind of an ecological approach to health, where you're looking at the whole complexity and finding out that balance within. And it's quite possible that this could be the next revolutionary advance in health sciences. And if only the Ayurvedic Vaidyas and doctors were to be aware of this important epistemological reason why Ayurveda starts out sort of ahead of the binary allopathic medicine, which is, allopathy means just treatment of symptoms. It has no theory of health inside the body, while Ayurveda does, because Ayurveda is a balance of the 3 doshas. Now, of course, you also have the 3 gunas. This whole tripartite system, given that ternary logic is superior to binary logic, is a very important thing. Now, I should also say that if somebody were to say, and this for an outsider, this is a kind of a very reasonable, skeptical position to begin with. And that skeptical position is that how is it possible that Indian rishis, thousands of years prior to our modern times, could have anticipated this all? Because certainly science has made amazing advances in the last 200 years after the Industrial Revolution. And prior to that, the scientific revolution, which is generally credited to the time of Newton and Leibniz and others. Now, before I forget, I should also mention that what is supposedly the beginning of the scientific revolution is the creation of calculus. And now modern scholarship has shown that calculus had already been created in Kerala, in the so-called Kerala School of Mathematics and Astronomy, 2 or 3 centuries prior to Newton, and everybody accepts it. There is no dispute about it. BBC even ran many years ago 8 or 10 part series on Kerala mathematics and astronomy. So even there, India has had a critical role to play in the rise of modern science. But now let me go back to the question that I was speaking about, which is, if a skeptic were to come and ask, how is it even possible that this was done? And I think the answer to that is that Western idea of what reality is perhaps limited. Well, it's limited in 2 reasons. The Western mainstream idea is that mind, which is normal consciousness, is a consequence of the electrical activity in the brain, and it's out of the complexity of the neuronal connections that this new phenomenon called consciousness arises, even though this is totally at variance with the understanding of quantum mechanics itself. In quantum mechanics, in the so-called Copenhagen interpretation, which is the most influential interpretation of quantum mechanics, and which is what the creators of quantum mechanics themselves believed in, consciousness is apart from physical reality. Now, to then respond to the skeptic, the answer is that, look, the rishis were aware of this division, and therefore, if you are aware that consciousness is apart from physical reality, then by delving into your own personal consciousness, and this personal consciousness in a mysterious way, in a counterintuitive, paroksha way, paradoxical way, is able to access all the knowledge, so to speak, and this is what really Vedanta says, everything is accessible to you. It's like the treasure house that's up there. If you can turn the gaze around, if you accept Shivoham, I am Shiva, because Shiva is consciousness within you. Or even the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, within each individual, I am present as Maheshwara, which is the same, Ishvara. So as Ishvara, it's a name for consciousness, then you have access to information. You have access to, just as Srinivasa Ramanujan used to say, that all these formulas used to come to him while from Namagiri, from his Kula Devi, Namagiri and Namakkal, right? So I believe personally that indeed it's true that this is where inspiration comes from. This is where creativity comes from, and that's the very basis of the Jnana Parampara of our Sanskrit tradition. And sadly, because of certain historical reasons related to the colonization of India, and more than the physical colonization, it was the colonization of mind which took hold, especially after 1947. And there was an attempt to erase India's own Jnana Parampara. And so people started believing that it all did not exist. Now, not only are we able to get all the evidence that there is, that I mentioned, for example, the Drishti, Srishti, Vada, Navya Nyayam, Kannada's own suktas, or Ashtadhyayi, or the whole series, the great astronomers, the very first in Bhaskaracharya's, in his Lilavati, where he mentions that, look, this Gurutvakarsan, gravitation, the reason why stars are up there is because the gravitation that they receive from the rest of the stars and objects cancels out. That is really the gravitation principle. That was not an idea which was known to anybody in the West until the time that gravitation theory came up. The equation, of course, Bhaskaracharya did not have the equation, but that is secondary. This was more central. So what we discover, looking at all the literature that we have, the most extraordinary tradition of knowledge that there exists, and it has within it the potential to solve the most difficult problems that confront science and society. In science, the problem of cosmology, as I mentioned, and I told you that e-dimensionality provides a solution. But really, this is the problem where the solution, where you are bringing the observer much more central to our understanding of this. Then the problem of computer science itself. In fact, one of the big issues in computer science is, will AI ultimately lead to consciousness? Because if AI leads to consciousness, and as some computer scientists believe will happen, and I think it's a totally misguided and wrong view that AI will lead to consciousness. But if AI were to lead to consciousness, you can imagine the whole world will change, because computers, once they become conscious, they won't have any need for humans, right? They will get rid of all the humans, and consciousness would have transferred from biological systems like ours to machines. But clearly, this is based on absolutely flawed reasoning, although some people do believe in this. And I can tell you that I've been a part of discussions on this at the highest level in the United States, in the scientific circles, and I think the fact that some people at the high levels are misguided about it could lead to very wrong policy decisions at the highest level, which could be detrimental to everybody. So I see that I have only 2 minutes left. So the final thing that I want to stress once again is the significance, as I mentioned, for health science, for well-being, modern individuals, because of all the brainwashing people receive through the media, through entertainment, through books, through what everybody tells them is that you are nothing but the body. Consciousness is a kind of incidental. So people are extremely unhappy once they have gone through all the sense experiences that one can have. And that is one explanation for why year after year, last few years, more than 100,000 Americans, young Americans, are dying of drug overdose. Why do we have such addiction problems? Because the whole American world is telling every young person that you're nothing but your body. So I think we have reached a very critical point in history, because with AI, with jobs going away, with perhaps population shrinking much faster than they have already started to shrink in countries like Japan, the whole economic outlook will change, social outlook will change, and already there are people thirsting for understanding of consciousness, and that understanding is available as Paravidya in the Sanskrit tradition. So I'm hoping that this is where all this emphasis on Sanskrit is so important. I wrote an essay on it, which I would recommend all of you should read. It's called The Case for Sanskrit. I put it on Medium, so please do read it. I'll also send a link after this talk. There are other reasons, even if one were not interested in the past, there are other reasons, for pragmatic reasons. Sanskrit is really something that everybody should be doing, and not just Indians, of people of all ages in all corners of the world should be doing it. And I'm so grateful that Sanskrit Bharati has done all the amazing stuff in the last 2 or 3 decades to reawaken India. So my namaskar to Sanskrit Bharati and to you, Karyakarta, for doing what you're doing. Dhanyavada.
धन्यवादाः महोदय. अहं श्रीकृपा, सैन् होसे नगरवासिनी, कुपर्टिनो संस्कृतकेन्द्रे कार्यकर्त्री च. भारतीयज्ञानपरम्परा इति विषयम् अधिकृत्य अस्मान् बोधितवते सुभाष काक् महोदयाय संस्कृतभारती परतः धन्यवादान् समर्पयामि. विविधेषु शास्त्रेषु अस्माकं पूर्वजानाम् आविष्कारान् ज्ञात्वा अतीव गर्वम् अनुभवामः. व्यस्तः सन् अपि हिन्दुपरम्परा स्मरणकार्यक्रमे अस्माकं ज्ञानपरम्परां प्रोफेसर् सुभाष काक् महोदयः स्मारितवान्. वयं धन्याः. अल्पे एव समये कार्यक्रम इमम् आयोजितवद्भ्यः कार्यकर्तृभ्यः धन्यवादाः. अग्रिमकार्यक्रमाणां सूचनाः. श्वः सङ्गीतपरम्परा कार्यक्रमस्य 2. सत्रं भविष्यति. श्री अरुण गंगाधरः महोदयः सङ्गीतपरम्परा विषये प्रस्तोष्यति. अक्टोबर् 18 मंगलवासरे राज्यशासनपरम्पराम् अधिकृत्य प्रोफेसर् गंगाधरन् नायर् महोदयस्य भाषणं भविष्यति. अक्टोबर् 19 बुधवासरे योगपरम्परा कार्यक्रमस्य 3. सत्रं भविष्यति. सर्वे कार्यक्रमाः अस्माकं संस्कृतभारती यूट्यूब चैनल मध्ये ईस्टर्न टाइम 9 प्रसार्यते. अद्यतन कार्यक्रमं शान्तिमन्त्रेण समापयामः. ओम सर्वे भवन्तु सुखिनः, सर्वे सन्तु निरामयाः, सर्वे भद्राणि पश्यन्तु, मा कश्चित् दुःखभाग् भवेत्. ओम शांति शांति शान्तिः. श्वः पुनर्मिलामः अत्रैव 9 ईस्टर्न टाइम समये. शुभरात्रिः.
Namaskar.